There's a specific kind of silence that happens right after your whole world falls apart. It's not quiet. It's heavy, pressing down on your chest like a bag of wet cement. And I'd been living in that silence for 18 months. Ever since Elena, my wife of 22 years, finally let go of my hand and slipped away after fighting breast cancer twice. But the sound that greeted me when I pulled my beat-up work truck into the driveway of my home in Oakwood Heights wasn't silence. It was the screaming, metal-on-metal grind of heavy machinery, the sound of diesel engines roaring where birds used to sing. And as I stepped out of the cab, my boots hitting the gravel, my brain couldn't process the visual data it was receiving because there, right in the backyard where Elena had spent her final remission planting a memorial garden, was a massive, yellow bulldozer, its steel treads grinding her prize-winning English tea roses into the mud. I stood there, a 48-year-old union plumber and demolition specialist named Jack Miller, watching a stranger tear apart the only sanctuary I had left, seeing the crushed petals of the flowers Elena had named the survivors scattered like blood across the churned earth. And before I could even shout, before I could run over there and drag the operator out of the cage, I saw her. She was walking toward me across the lawn, navigating the uneven grass in pristine white designer heels that probably cost more than my excavator, wearing a white power suit that repelled dirt by sheer force of will, smiling that terrifying, tight-lipped smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind of smile a shark gives you right before it drags you under. This was Victoria Sterling, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, a luxury real estate broker who drove a white Mercedes, lived in a white mansion, and treated people who worked with their hands like we were part of the landscaping, just background noise to her perfect life. "Jack," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern that makes your skin crawl, stepping right into my personal space like she owned the air I was breathing. "Jack, I'm so glad you're home. We're doing something absolutely transformative here, something that is going to skyrocket your property value." And while she was talking, gesturing with a manicured hand, I watched the bulldozer blade snap the trellis Elena and I had built on our 20th anniversary, the wood splintering, with a sound like a gunshot. "Get them off my land," I said, my voice shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. But Victoria just laughed, a light, dismissive tinkling sound, and waved a sheaf of legal-looking papers in my face, telling me, "Oh, Jack, don't be dramatic. Technically this is community space. We found a discrepancy in the old 1980s survey. A clerical error, really. So we're reclaiming it to build the Oakwood Heights Community Center, a 4,000-square-foot clubhouse. With an infinity pool, it's going to be magnificent." She paused, looking at my devastated face, looking at the ruin of my dead wife's garden, and then she delivered the line that would eventually cost her everything. She said, "Don't worry about the flowers. We've authorized a fair compensation check for the inconvenience. $3,000 for the removal of the landscaping." And she extended an envelope toward me like she was tipping a valet. $3,000 for the hallowed ground where Elena had sat in her wheelchair, soaking up the sun. $3,000 for the living memory of the woman who was my entire universe. I didn't take the envelope. I just looked at her, and something inside me shifted, a gear clicking into place, because Victoria Sterling had made the classic mistake of confusing grief with weakness. She looked at me and saw a broken widower, a blue-collar nobody who would roll over and take the scraps. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I document everything. It's an occupational hazard after 25 years in construction where clients lie about billable hours, so I didn't scream, I didn't throw a punch. I just pulled out my phone and started taking high-resolution, time-stamped photos of every inch of destruction, capturing the intrusion, the equipment, and her standing there in her white suit on my land. "You know what, Victoria?" I said, smiling a smile that felt tight on my face. "You go right ahead and finish your beautiful clubhouse." And that confusion on her face, that split second of doubt where she wondered why I wasn't fighting back, that was the first crack in her armor, though neither of us knew it yet. That night, my 17-year-old daughter Sophie found me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., buried under a mountain of county records and zoning maps I'd pulled from the basement, her eyes red from crying because Victoria's daughter, Tiffany, had already started the rumor mill at school, telling everyone that the poor widower was trying to block community progress because he was greedy, and looking at Sophie. Seeing the pain caused by these people who treated our lives like a game, I realized this wasn't just about roses anymore. It was about survival. The escalation began the very next morning. Victoria wasn't content with just stealing my land. She wanted to crush my will to fight. So I walked out to find 3 neon orange violation stickers plastered on my front door, citing me for commercial vehicles in a residential zone, improper property maintenance, and noise violations, threatening to fine me into bankruptcy for parking my work truck in the driveway where it had sat undisturbed for 15 years. I called the City Code Enforcement Office, expecting a bureaucratic runaround, and got transferred directly to the building inspector, a man named Gavin Sterling. And the moment I heard his last name, the pieces started to click together, because Gavin wasn't just some random bureaucrat. He was Victoria's brother-in-law, the man who had rubber-stamped the permits for the clubhouse currently being framed in my backyard. "Mr. Miller," Gavin said, his voice slick and dismissive, "these are serious infractions. We're going to need to schedule a full property review. And frankly, that demolition truck of yours is an eyesore that lowers the tone of the entire neighborhood." And when I asked him about the permits for the clubhouse, about the setbacks, about the property lines, there was a heavy pause on the line before he said, "Everything is in order. The permits are signed and sealed. Don't waste your time." But I wasn't wasting time. I was buying it. So I drained my savings account, taking money that was meant for Sophie's college fund, and hired Leo Vance, the most anal-retentive, obsessive independent surveyor in the state, a guy who measured reality down to the millimeter, and I paid him to map every single inch of my property and the surrounding community land. 3 days later, Leo was standing in my kitchen, his face pale, holding a digital map that looked like a smoking gun, and he pointed to a red line that bisected the construction site, telling me, "Danny, they aren't just encroaching, they are occupying. The foundation for that clubhouse extends 15 feet onto your legal property, not inches, 15 feet. And in this state, the setback requirement is another 15 feet, which means Gavin Sterling approved a building that is illegal on almost every conceivable level." I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind you get when the demo charge is set and you're holding the detonator. So I called Victoria, told her I had the survey, told her the building was on my land, and I'll never forget her response. She just laughed, a cold, confident sound, and said, "Jack, darling, surveys are open to interpretation, and my brother-in-law creates the interpretations. So why don't you stop fighting the inevitable and let us improve your life?" She thought she had the system rigged. She thought the game was fixed because she held all the face cards. But she didn't realize that when you push a man who has nothing left to lose, you don't get submission, you get total war. By the second week, the war had moved from my backyard to the dinner table. Sophie came home from school one afternoon, dropped her backpack, and just collapsed into the chair, tears streaming down her face because the dance committee had kicked her out, claiming her family situation was a distraction, which was code for Victoria Sterling making phone calls to the other moms, isolating my daughter socially to pressure me into selling. They were fining me $150 a day now for the unsightly work trailer, the fine stacking up like bricks, totaling nearly $6,000, threatening to trigger a foreclosure clause in the HOA covenants I hadn't read closely enough 20 years ago. And I sat there, watching my daughter cry, watching the bank account dwindle, feeling the walls closing in, but instead of breaking, I got angry, really angry. I went back to the paperwork, digging deeper, because Leo Vance, my surveyor, had noticed something else on the maps, something that had nothing to do with property lines and everything to do with what lay beneath the soil. He'd pointed out a series of blue lines on the 1960s Federal Geological Surveys, marking an underground spring system that ran directly under Victoria's construction site, a spring system that fed into a protected wetland habitat for the Blue Ridge salamander. I started pulling the environmental impact studies that Gavin Sterling had approved, looking for the sign-off on the wetlands. And there it was, a signature from a Dr. Arthur Blake, a wetland specialist who had supposedly certified that the construction wouldn't impact the water table or the endangered species. And it looked official, it looked bulletproof, until I called the consulting firm listed on the letterhead and asked to speak to him. "I'm sorry, sir," the receptionist said, her voice confused. "Dr. Blake passed away in 2019. He hasn't worked here in over 2 years." And I sat there in my kitchen, holding the phone, staring at a permit dated 6 months ago, signed by a dead man. Realizing that Victoria and Gavin hadn't just bent the rules, they had committed federal fraud, forgery, and environmental crimes that carried mandatory prison sentences. But knowing it and proving the damage were two different things, until my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who had lived next door for 40 years, knocked on my door clutching a mason jar filled with water that looked like chocolate milk and smelled like swimming pool chemicals. "Jack," she whispered, looking over her shoulder like she was afraid of being watched. "My husband has been throwing up for weeks. The water tastes wrong. Ever since they poured that foundation, something is wrong with the well." And I took that jar, held it up to the light, and saw the swirling sediment of a crime scene. I paid Leo the last of my money, literally the last few dollars I had, to run a full toxicity panel on the neighborhood wells, and when the results came back, they were terrifying. High levels of chlorine, construction runoff, and bacteria, because Victoria's contractors had cracked the underground aquifer when they dug the foundation for her vanity pool, and now, chlorinated water was bleeding directly into the drinking supply of 12 families. This was it, the nuclear option, so I reached out to a lawyer Leo knew, a sharp-as-nails woman named Rachel Cohen who specialized in environmental law, and when she saw the forged signature, the water tests, and the federal habitat maps, she didn't just smile. She looked like a wolf who had found a wounded deer. "Jack," Rachel said, leaning over her desk, "this isn't a property dispute anymore. This is a violation of the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act. These are federal offenses. The EPA doesn't care about HOA boards or local building inspectors. If we can prove this, they won't just stop the construction, they will mandate a return to nature order." And she explained that federal law overrides everything, meaning if the building is illegal, it has to come down immediately. We brought in the EPA, and an investigator named Agent Maya Brooks showed up, a young woman who looked at Victoria's Community Excellence project and saw only a crime against nature. She subpoenaed the emails between Victoria and Gavin, finding the smoking gun where Victoria explicitly told him to use the old signature, "Nobody checks anyway," and promising him $10,000 for his trouble. Victoria, sensing the sharks circling but not knowing the size of the boat, tried one last desperate play. She showed up at my door with a bouquet of white roses, an insult to the red ones she'd destroyed, and an offer of $100,000 cash if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and withdrew my nuisance complaints. "Think of Sophie," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This money could pay for her college. You could move somewhere more appropriate for your lifestyle." And she stood there, offering me a bribe on my own porch, trying to buy my silence with money she'd probably stolen from the HOA reserves. "I'll think about it," I lied, my heart pounding against my ribs. "But I need until Monday." Knowing full well that Monday was the day Rachel had scheduled the emergency federal injunction hearing, and coincidentally, the exact same day Victoria was throwing a massive grand opening gala for the clubhouse, inviting the mayor, the press, and the entire social register to celebrate her triumph. Perfect, Victoria beamed, thinking she had won, thinking everyone had a price. "We'll announce the settlement at the party." And she walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, completely unaware that I was already recording the conversation for the FBI agent, Agent Ross, who was sitting in my living room listening to the whole thing on a headset. "That's witness tampering and attempted bribery," Agent Ross said, taking off the headphones, his face grim. "We have enough, Jack. On Monday, we take them all down." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron, the kind of heavy, humid atmosphere that screams of a coming storm. While Victoria Sterling was busy arranging catering trucks and floral arches for her grand gala, I was sitting in a federal courtroom in downtown Charlotte, watching Judge Harper flip through the evidence file with an expression of increasing disgust. Victoria wasn't there, of course. She was too busy being the queen bee, but her lawyer was, looking sweaty and terrified as Rachel Cohen laid it out. The dead man's signature, the poisoned wells, the bribe, the salamander habitat. Judge Harper didn't even hesitate. She slammed the gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "This court finds clear evidence of criminal conspiracy and environmental devastation. I am issuing an immediate injunction. The structure is to be condemned and removed forthwith to facilitate habitat restoration. Marshal, execute the order." Judge Harper looked at me then, over her spectacles. "Mr. Miller, the court understands you are a licensed demolition contractor?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And you are willing to undertake the removal of this illegal structure under federal supervision, effective immediately?" "It would be my pleasure, Your Honor." I made it back to Oakwood Heights by 11 a.m. The scene at the clubhouse was straight out of a magazine. Waiters passing champagne, a string quartet playing Mozart, and about 200 of the town's elite mingling on the patio, admiring the infinity pool that was currently poisoning their neighbors. Victoria was at the microphone, looking triumphant in a shimmering silver dress, holding a glass of bubbly high. "To progress," she toasted, and the crowd cheered. That's when I started the engine. I had parked my excavator just over the property line, hidden behind a stand of pines, and when I fired up that massive diesel engine, the roar cut through the string quartet like a chainsaw. I rolled out, the massive steel tracks chewing up the manicured lawn, the hydraulic arm raised like the fist of God. Behind me, 3 black SUVs pulled up, and Agent Ross, accompanied by federal marshals, and Agent Maya Brooks from the EPA, stepped out. The music died. The crowd turned, mouths gaping. Victoria stormed down the steps, her face twisting from grace to fury. "What is the meaning of this? Jack, get that monstrosity off my property immediately." "It's not your property, Victoria," I shouted over the engine's idle. "And it's not a clubhouse anymore. It's a crime scene." Agent Ross stepped forward, badge flashing in the sun. "Victoria Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to violate the Clean Water Act, and bribery of a public official." Before she could even scream, the marshals were there, clicking the handcuffs on her wrists. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the party. Then, they went for Gavin, who tried to run toward his car, but was tackled by 2 agents near the buffet table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Maya Brooks announced to the horrified guests, "this area is now a federal environmental remediation zone. Please vacate the premises immediately. Demolition is commencing." The mayor, who was holding a shrimp cocktail, looked at me, then at the excavator, then at Victoria being shoved into the back of a squad car, and he bolted. The guests scattered like roaches when the lights come on, tripping over their designer gowns, leaving their champagne glasses on the tables. But about 50 people stayed. Neighbors, people like Mrs. Gable and my daughter Sophie, who was standing there with her friends, filming everything on her phone, a look of fierce pride on her face. I throttled up. The excavator lurched forward. I didn't rush it. I was methodical. I swung the boom and brought the bucket down on the infinity pool first. The concrete cracked with a sound like a thunderclap, and the chlorinated water gushed out, flooding the fake landscaping, revealing the dark, muddy truth beneath. Then I turned to the clubhouse, Victoria's palace. I drove the bucket through the roof of the grand atrium. Glass shattered, timber snapped, and the prestige she valued so much crumbled into dust. It took me 6 hours. 6 hours to tear down what took her 6 months of lies to build. By late afternoon, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the rubble. The structure was gone. And there, bubbling up through the broken foundation of the pool, was the spring. Clear, cold water, finally free to flow again. The fallout was absolute. Victoria and Gavin both went to federal prison. 5 years for her, 3 for him. The fines and restitution totaled nearly $1.2 million, every cent of which went to me and the affected neighbors. Victoria's mansion was foreclosed on to pay her legal bills. But the real ending happened 6 months later. I was in the backyard, kneeling in the dirt. The money had allowed me to fix the land, to work with the EPA to restore the wetland. We had replanted. Sophie handed me a sapling, a new breed of rose. "You know, Dad," she said, looking at the water bubbling from the restored spring, "Mom would have loved the way you handled the excavator. It was very theatrical." I laughed, the sound easy and light, the heavy silence finally gone. She hated bullies, sophomore. She really hated bullies. We sat there as the sun went down, the smell of fresh earth and blooming roses filling the air, simpler and sweeter than any luxury clubhouse. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? We rely on these systems, HOAs, inspectors, zoning boards, to keep order, to maintain standards. But when the people running the system decide that property value is worth more than human health, or that a view, is worth more than a family sanctuary. Where's the line? At what point does community improvement just become tyranny with a better brochure? I did what I had to do. I tore it down to set it right. But how many Victorias are out there right now, signing permits with dead men's names, counting on the fact that you won't fight back? Maybe it's time you check your own property lines.